And my name is Harri Happonen, and my background is in engineering, and I have been working here at Inion now 21 years. I'm one of the co-founders of the Inion company, and before that I was a researcher in the university and worked in the bionics implants here in Tampere as well. So, but let's start the presentation, and please send the questions to chat, and then we try to answer those after the presentation. I will share my screen with you now, so you will able to follow the presentation. So, 21st years with the Inion. Now the company is 21 years old, but what we have here now, we have 20 years of clinical use with the Inion implants. First, I will introduce the Inion company to you shortly. Thereafter, a little bit about the bioabsorbable polymers and their history in the clinical use. What products we have developed during 20 years at Inion. What is important for the degradation of the resorbable polymers and implants. And then a little bit about the clinical use, safety, and performance of the Inion implants. And then there is plenty of slides, so I hope we can all manage within 30 minutes. So the Inion company was established 1999 here in Tampere, Finland, by the polymer scientists and orthopedic and craniomaxillofacial surgeons. We are fully dedicated and focused in resorbable polymers and implants made out of those. We have the full-scale testing laboratory here in-house, as well as the clean room production. So all Inion resorbable implants are made here in Tampere, Finland. We are audited by the international regulatory bodies like FDA, BSI, ANVISA, and Korean Food and Drug Administration. So we have several auditors here every year, and of course that is the basis for the high quality products which are required in this business. About the history of resorbable implants here in Tampere and resorbable polymers here in Tampere. The biodegradable polyesters based on lactic acid and glycolic acid are old materials already. They were invented already more than 70 years ago, but they didn't have interest in the engineering applications. But finally in 60s and 70s, the researchers found out that, yeah, why not use the resorbable polymers in the medical applications, and then polyglycolic sutures were developed and launched by Davis and Keck in 1970s in the USA. That was the first resorbable product used in the medical field. At the same time, research and studies started also here in Tampere University of Technology, and it was done together with the pioneer raw material suppliers like Burak, Biochem, and Boehringer Ingelheim. They were developing their raw materials and together with the university researchers. And finally, the first implants were developed here in Tampere University of Technology in '84, and the implant and surgery was done in the Helsinki University together with Professor Rokkanen. During these 40 years, we have several companies here in Tampere in this business, and still we have here a very strong research and looking forward for the new, even more advanced materials which are coming in the coming years. The first polymers used in the implants were homopolymers, meaning that there was only one molecule in the polymer, either polyglycolic acid or poly-L-lactic acid. And however, they were not optimal, completely optimal for the bone fixation or surgical applications because of their degradation profile. The PGA is very fast degrading and PLLA is very slow degrading. So the researchers developed the copolymers from those polymers and to obtain the more suitable degradation profile for the implants. And in 90s, the copolymers of polylactic acid to glycolic acid were launched, and then the degradation profile was more suitable for the medical devices. However, those implants were still brittle, and what we at Inion started in 2000, we started to copolymer blending. So we mixed strong and rigid polymer with elastic ductile polymer to make the implant both resolving in a suitable time frame, but also changing the brittle properties to tactile properties. During these 20 years, we have also launched biocomposite materials and also polymer orientation process to make the implants even stronger than previously. And then we call that polymer technology as Inion polymers or Inion polymer technology. And then we will see more about that in the coming slides. In the next slides, I will introduce the Inion products which we have developed during the 20 years history. So the first product line was Inion CPS and Inion CPS Baby plating system for the craniomaxillofacial surgery, both for trauma, orthodontic, as well as pediatric craniofacial surgery. And that was the first product line launched in 2001. And actually the first surgery was done around 20 years ago in May 2001 in UK. And after that, 120 surgeries have been done with the Inion CPS implants worldwide. The resorbable implants are nowadays state-of-art products in the cranial reconstruction surgeries. And here is one example of a case which Dr. Murray did in Ireland. And there is a metopic synostosis skull, and then the skull was remodeled and fixed with the Inion CPS Baby plates. As I mentioned, the resorbable implants are the state of art in the cranial reconstruction surgeries, and it's obvious that if you use the metal implants, they have to be removed within 6 months after operation. And in this case, this is from Dr. Murray's presentations. There was a patient who got the metal implants in a primary surgery, but unfortunately the implants were not removed, and after 3 years they were grown inside the skull, and the reoperation was very difficult to done. We have the Hexalon screws for the ACL, PCL reconstruction, as well as Trinion screw for the meniscal repair procedures. For the shoulder surgery, we have the Inion Fixon biocomposite suture anchor, and that's the first biocomposite product which we have developed at Inion, and more is coming. So the products, you may notice that some of the products are colored, some are clear. The color is added to the products which are used arthroscopically, so that they are easy to see in the operation in the screen. And also here we were thinking about the improvement of the material properties. The biocomposite materials tend to be brittle because of the ceramic filler, but with the Inion polymer, we were able to mix the ceramic filler, TCP filler, with the matrix polymer so well that the strength of the material was improved significantly. The Inion Freedom plates and screws are used in orthopedic bone fixation. The most common fracture indication is the ankle fracture. Another common fracture is the ulnar fracture fixation. But of course, the screws can be used in many indications in upper and lower extremity, and also inside the joints. We develop also together with the implants, also the instruments to make the procedure easier and faster. This is just an example of the drill tab which we developed for the Freedom screws. It makes the drill hole and the threads in the bone in one step. And of course, it's easier for the doctor to make this procedure and faster. And that's why doctors really like that. And always ask simple instrumentation and products to be used. The Inion Freedom and OTP pins are products for the orthopedic applications, and these are used in same kind of procedures which you think about when you think about the Kirchner wires or K wires where you are using. So typically the indications are in small bones, in hand or foot, but they can be also used inside the joints in osteochondral fracture fixation. And good feature here with the pin is that there is no head in the pin, which makes possible to insert the pin completely inside the fracture. So there is no head on the fracture inside the joints, and minimize risk for any kind of complications. The ankle fracture is, as I mentioned, is one of the most common fractures which are happening in the orthopedics, and that's the common fracture for the Inion Freedom implants too. This is a quite severe fracture. Both tibia and fibula have been fractured, and they were corrected with the Freedom screws. Always, as you can see here, there is a plaster cast used as an additional immobilization. So the implants cannot, resorbable implants cannot be used alone, but the additional immobilization like a plaster cast is required during bone healing, which is normally 6 weeks in orthopedic applications. Here you can see one example of the elective orthopedics where the Freedom screw were used in arthrodesis. 2 4.5 millimeter screws were used to fix the bones and make the fusion in the MTP1 joint. And here is an example of double midshaft forearm fracture. The Freedom plates were used here in both radius and ulna, and 3.5 weeks after operation, you can see the screw holes and the fracture line still. And here as well, you can see that there is a plaster cast used and removed 6 weeks after operation. 6 months after operation, you can see nice bone healing, but you can see the screw holes still. The screw holes will stay in the bone until the implant has completely resorbed, which happens in around 2 years, and thereafter the screw holes can be filled with the bone. And we have evidence also for that, showing that within 3 to 5 years after operation, the small screw holes will be filled with the bone. The Inion S1 is the plate for the anterior cervical discectomy and fusion procedures, and the key function here is to keep the graft in place. The good thing here is also that the polymers, because they have a viscoelastic properties, it allows some flexibility and movement of the vertebra, so that the load is transferred always through the graft, not through the plate, which enhances the fusion of the grafts. Also good thing for the post-operative follow-up is that resorbable implants, they do not cause interference in the imaging, and that's why the MRI analyses are easy to make. The Inion S1 is the lumbar fusion plate, and it's available in the US only. And then finally, we have the BioRestore, which is the synthetic, bioactive and biodegradable bone graft substitute made out of bioactive glass. And it's made out of glass fibers, which are sintered together to form granules. And that allows open porous structure inside the granules here. So even this looks like a sugar, but they are all open porous, and there's around 70% of porosity inside the granules, which allows the bone growth inside the granules as well. The very important feature of the bioactive glass is their antibacterial properties, which is caused by the increased pH during the degradation of the bioactive glass. The pH is increasing to around 10 to 11, which inhibits the bacterial growth. And we have selected the bioactive glass material in Inion BioRestore so that it completely remodels the bone in 6 months. You can tailor and change the degradation time of the bioactive glass as well by changing the raw materials of the glass. So as a window glass, it's non-resorbable, but when you change the properties, you can make it also resorbable. Then a little bit about the degradation of bioabsorbable polymers and implants. So of course, as we already discussed a little bit about the too fast and too slow degradation. So the polyglycolic acids were too fast degrading the first generation polymers, and L-lactic acids were too slowly degrading. So they were not optimal. So that's why it's important to select the polymer and copolymer which is degrading in an appropriate way. And it's always important that the properties of the implants are indication specific. That's why Inion is not using only one polymer for the implants, all their implants, but we are selecting different composition of blend mixture of the polymers for different applications. For example, for the pediatric craniofacial procedure, you can have a faster degrading polymer because the skull is growing, and also the metabolism of the young patient, pediatric patient, is faster. They can tolerate the higher rate of degradation byproducts. However, then in the spinal indications, you need to have a longer strength retention time, and you need to select a different kind of polymer for those applications. So that's what we are doing at Inion. And with the Inion, we can always as well guarantee that the degradation of the implant is controlled and gradual, minimizing the risk of adverse reactions. What makes and what breaks the polymer then in the body? So, and actually, the simple answer is water. And that's why it's important that the water can penetrate all over in the implant. And that's why it's important that the raw material or the polymer is amorphous, has an amorphous structure. And nowadays, most of the companies and manufacturers already have this amorphous structure in their implants. But it's good to remember that these early stage polymers were made from highly crystalline polymers, which didn't degrade completely. So nowadays, the implants are mainly made from the amorphous copolymers, and they degrade in a safe way. If you have a highly crystalline polymer, the amorphous sections between the crystals will degrade, but these red areas will stay in the body for 5 to 10 years and may cause some issues during that time. As I mentioned, Inion has also oriented polymers, but they are also amorphous, and the water can penetrate and be absorbed everywhere in the polymer, meaning that they are also completely degradable. Here you can see the 5 stages of the degradation of the implants. So the first is that the water is absorbed in the body and in the implant, and that's called hydration. So and it will happen during the first 24 hours basically. So there is water molecules everywhere in the implant, and thereafter the water will start breaking the polymer, and the molecular weight of the implant start decreasing. However, the implants stay strong if it's designed properly until the molecular weight has reached a certain level, and then you can see the strength loss as well. And finally, the implants start fragmenting in the body. However, the implant stays in the body and it does not go away immediately. And it's only able to go and absorb from the body after the molecules get into the smaller sizes, so that they become water soluble, and then they can go into intracellular degradation process, which is called Krebs cycle, and then the materials are extruded as the water and carbon dioxide from the body. And typically this process takes around 2 years with the Inion implants. I mentioned that we are not using only one polymer in the Inion implants, and here you can see the list of the polymers which we are using. We are using polylactic acid, polydielectric acid, polyglycolic acid, and trimethylene carbonate. These all have different properties, and by mixing those different polymers, we can optimize the properties of the Inion implants. And that's why we can say that the Inion implants and polymers, they have tailored strength and degradation profile. We can make the implants tough, not brittle, and they always have amorphous or substantially amorphous structure, meaning that water is able to absorb everywhere in the implant and degradation is complete. We can also guarantee that the degradation is predictable and gradual, and then happening in around 1.5 to 5 years. In average, it's around 2 years. The polymer orientation is a nice process, actually, because you are using the same raw material, same polymer, but you can change the strength significantly. Here you can see the randomly oriented polymer and after injection molding or extrusion process. However, if you manipulate the polymers in a certain temperature by cooling them, you can align the polymer chains. And then the randomly oriented polymers we are using in injection molded products like Inion CPS plates and screws and Inion Hexalon screws. And by orientation, we can improve the strength and strength retention time significantly. And that's why we are using those in orthopedic applications, like in the Inion Freedom Pin and Inion Freedom screws. Here you can see a simple example also how much orientation can improve the strength. This is 4.5 millimeter screw made out of non-oriented polymer. And this is the Inion Freedom screw, same size, 4.5 millimeter, made out of oriented polymer. And we can more than double the shear load capacity by doing the orientation for the polymer. What affects the final product properties and the clinical outcome? There are several factors, and what we can do here at Inion, we can of course select the polymer such that it degrades certain way and certain speed and in a safe way. We can select the process conditions, temperature, time, humidity. We can select the sterilization method so that the final product has appropriate properties. Of course, during the product development, we have to consider different geometries. We have to always think about the total mass of the implant, and then the strength of the implant and requirements, strength requirements in the surgical application. But then also very important factor is the implantation site, which then the doctor must select. And of course, we have the indications, and we list the safe indications in our instructions. But anyway, the patients are different, and there is some patient selection needed as well. Basic rule is that inside bone, the vascularity is better than outside bone, so it's less risky indication. Also, under thick soft tissue coverage, there is a better vascularization than under thin soft tissue, and it also reduces the risk of any kind of complications. This is the graph showing that that even the metal implants, they are very safe and easy to use, and provides a very good clinical outcome. Sometimes they need to be removed, and this is the Swedish register study where they analyzed all orthopedic metal implants used in 2011, and 37,000 implants were used in adult patients, and from 13,000 were removed during the following years, meaning that 35% of the patients had to go for the removal operation. And this is then the study by Dr. Cook, and it was the ankle study with the OTPS, Inion OTPS plates and screws, with 50 patients, and 4 out of those 4 patients had some kind of complication related to product, and meaning that 8% of the patients had to go for the revision surgery. Anyway, the number of revision cases is much lower than with the metal implants. Dr. Noh did the study with the Inion Freedom Blade. So we learned from this earlier study that actually the screw heads under the soft tissue caused most of the problems with the resorbable blades. And the Noh used the Inion Freedom Blade, where you can cut the screw heads off, and there is no screw heads left on the blade. And the finding was that the clinical outcome was similar both in the metal patient group and resorbable patient group. However, 34% of the metal implants had to be removed, and only 2% of the biodegradable implants had to go for the follow-up surgery, meaning that 1 out of 49 patients in the biodegradable Inion Freedom group. And then what was we also learned from that it's important that we consider always the profile of the blade and what may cause irritation for the soft tissue. And here we can see that by changing the design of the implant, we were able to change the make the implant safer and reduce the complication rate from 8 even to 2, which is in a very good level already. Of course, there is always a risk for the complication when you do the surgery, but I would say that 2% is very very acceptable level already in the orthopedic procedures. I just checked from the Inion database that we have nowadays more than 300 clinical and preclinical studies and publication articles, posters published in from Inion products. And nowadays we have 21 years clinical use with the Inion implants, and we have plenty of long-term research, published research here. For example, Dr. Jervy in the USA, he published 10 years follow-up for 745 patients in craniomaxillofacial surgery. Dr. Järvelä published 10 years follow-up with the Inion hexalon screw in the anterior cruciate ligament reconstruction. And Dr. Rodrigo published 7 years follow-up for the S1 plates and screws in anterior cervical discectomy and fusion procedures. We have plenty of other studies which you can find in the clinical Inion clinical and preclinical evidence guide from the you can download it from the Inion webpage. Please feel free to check that. And finally, 1 million implants have been nowadays used. So it's a good number already for Inion. And we can say that estimate that 300,000 surgeries have been done with the Inion implants. And the complication and rate is very small compared to estimated number of operations. So we can say that we are talking less than 1% complication rate. However, you have to understand that the implants are different, and when you put the implant inside the bone, the complication rate is very small, or the risk of the complication is very small. And then when you put something on the bone and there is only thin soft tissue, then the risk is higher, and it can be a couple percent, as we can see in the published literature. We are very proud that we have 60 active partners and distributors all over the world nowadays, and the Inion implants are used in 49 countries nowadays. So I'm looking forward to working with you in the coming years as well, and hope we can expand the Inion use and work with the doctors very closely in the future too. As a summary, I would say that the Inion and resorbable implants are the better option because they do not have an implant palpability, visibility, and sensitivity in long term. They resorb, no growth restriction for the pediatric patients, no imaging interference, and avoidance of removal surgery, reducing patient cost, trauma, and shorter rehabilitation time. Thank you from Tampere, and I hope you got something from the presentation, and if there are some questions, I'm happy to answer those now.